Are you ready? Because it's time to begin the build of the custom KINETIX from ST Jets. Thank you ST Jets for getting this beautiful aircraft here. Thank you to AeroPanda for organizing it, and we're starting the build now. All right, so the plane comes with a wonderful manual. One of my favorite things about this manual is it tells you what servo arms to use, the length of your servo arms, which is very helpful. Shows you absolutely everything on the aircraft. So as we begin most build videos, pretty much all build videos, we want to cover all the equipment that we're putting in the aircraft. So of course the power plant that's going in here is a Swewin 240 engine. Now the manufacturer calls for a 210 as the biggest size. Reason I'm going with a 240 is at our elevation of 3,300 feet above sea level, there's always about a 15 to 20% reduction in thrust. So this will be very similar to a 210 engine in this aircraft, and we can always dial it down a little bit, but there's our power plant. All right, servo lineup is all MKS 599s for all the control surfaces. The MKS 747s, one of these is for the tiny little nose door, and the other one is for the main split nose doors. A little excessive on the nose servos, but that's okay. Of course, we're using a Cortex Pro in this aircraft, which is pretty much the norm here at the lighter side of RC. And we're going to be using our Jetty DS24 to pilot the aircraft. We're going to be using a Central Box 220 for our main power hub and two Rex 7, maybe a Rex 7 and a Rex 3 receiver with the 40 centimeter dipole antennas. Now our landing gear in the aircraft, we are going to be using Electron landing gear. The Electron landing gear is currently en route, and Electron I think has shipped out the order already, so we may get the plane done and just have the gear to install. So we'll run all the wiring for the gear while we're waiting. I don't want to be just waiting for the gear wiring, and I think we'll get the plane pretty much done in time for the gear to show up. Now this plane, it is a huge plane. Generally, planes in this size would use an ER50 system. This plane is so light, the final weight is about 37 pounds dry, and because of that, ER40s are perfect, and looking forward to that. Okay, so we put the aircraft together just to get our opening scenes for the video, and now it is time to take the aircraft apart. And we'll start off as normal with the back end and work our way forward. So we've got everything disassembled here. We've got the fuselage split, wings laid out, canopy laid out. So first thing I did is take the pipe out. So first thing I want to do on the pipe is switch out the nuts and bolts here. But I prefer to use rivets in this case. So I'm going to pull these out, replace them with rivets, and then the pipe will be good to go. Okay, so pipe has been dealt with here. We've taken all the fasteners out and installed rivets, and you can see there, put washers on the rivets to give them a nice bite. And we put the rivets from the inside to the outside, so there's essentially nothing showing in the bell mouth. So pipe is good to go, ready to go back in the aircraft, but we're not ready to put that back in the aircraft. Now all of the servos have been run through the Jetty box. Now if you're a fan of the channel and you've watched my videos before, you're familiar with this. So I use the Jetty box to cycle all of my servos before they go in a build. And one thing you can do with the Jetty box is the servo cycler. So I run them for 990 cycles. That's the max you can do in one session. And I run them the full bandwidth, I guess. So it's 500 whatever it is. And so it runs the full width. And I run it at a speed of 30. So it takes about 25 to 30 minutes to cycle a servo, and then it just go through them. It's one of those things I do while doing other stuff. Okay, so with our back end here ready to install servos, we are going to start off with our rudder and two elevators. That's step number one here. Now the aircraft itself, we've got designated holes to feed our wire through. This is an anti-rotation pin. That's the main tube for the rudder. This back end is just crazy light. So cool. And then same thing on the elevators. You've got your main tube here, your anti-rotation pin, and then your designated hole for the servo connector. Now the actual surfaces themselves, you've got nice big spaces here, so really we just need to make sure that that part coming through the fuselage is solid, and we're going to use a grommet in there, and there's lots of room for it to float around in here. Same thing on the elevators too. The elevators, we want to just keep in mind that we want to keep it away from the actual movement, but there's the hole right there for the wire to come through, so again, should be no problem at all. So we're going to get our servos out, we're going to get our designated servo arms out, and we will work on these three surfaces. So as per normal, guys, we have updated all of our Jetty products, and we have set up a new model in the radio. So we're all fresh, good to go. Radio's just charging right now. So we're starting off with the elevators. We've got an 1.5 inch servo arm, which is what's recommended. In this case, we're using the MKS heavy duty ones. Now, a couple considerations here for the elevator servos. You can see here with the servo sitting in there, you've got a little bit of room. Left, right, up, down. So what I'll do in this case is I'll have it in a supported neutral position. So in this case, the servo is sitting against the top or bottom of the elevator opening, and I'm going to move it back towards the surface. So the reason for that is our arm here is a little bit off-centered. Inez. Come on, buddy. So now we're going to screw this servo in place. We're going to leave the cable full length, put some snakeskin on this guy, and we'll be changing the end out to an ashlock end. Now all of the hardware is in pre-labeled bags, which is super helpful. Stabilizers, rudder, everything else is labeled. So we've got our parts just laid out in our build tray here. This is something that I've been playing around and printing on my new 3D printer. So this is awesome. We have new build trays, can separate things out. And I've just been playing with different materials, and that's pretty cool. Okay, so we've got both of the elevators complete with the servo installation done. So before I switch the ends to the ashlock ends, I'm going to get my linkages all set up just to keep things nice and easy. And not that the ashlocks are difficult to plug into the central box, but in this case, it's just uber simple. So what we do in this case is we plug our servo into the central box, and then we just simply get our linkage set up. Now the linkages are very simple. We've got 2 ball joints, one on each end. Comes with a carbon sleeve as well. Now this carbon sleeve may need to be sized, and I like to glue these carbon sleeves onto the rod. I think it just works better, so I'll just use a little bit of high sol once I find the right length. Glue that on. So in this case, what I do is I thread 1 ball joint on first, then we adjust the length of the carbon sleeve off, put some high sol on there, glue it all together, and then we are rock solid. And it makes a really stiff linkage. So the reason I like to glue these is so when they're glued, they become one piece and there's no play between the carbon outer and the metal inner. Okay, so I like to do the ball joint on this side first. Also what I'll do is put some tape over the fixed surface. So what that does is that keeps the surface perfectly straight and in line with everything. So now all of our adjustments are going to be on this end. So what we simply have to do is we'll put the carbon over top, we will put the ball joint on there, and we just need to take a look at it and see how it works. So this may be the perfect length. I don't think so. Looks like we need to cut that carbon down a little bit, which we'll do. So we just hold this up, line everything up, and cut the carbon to where it needs to go. Servo right now is centered, so now we just need to line everything up. So we just take a paint marker, and I mark the area that I want cut off. So right on that edge. And then we know we need to take a little bit of the rod off. Okay, so working on the wiring leads here for the elevator. So I've made up our extension for the rear portion of the fuselage. We've got our ashlock connector on this side, so obviously we're going to put the other style of connector on that side, and just working on where this is coming through the fuselage. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take an 8mm through fitting. These are available on my website. So these are designed for 8mm festo tubing is what they're for. But I love to use them in this kind of case because it just helps protect the wire. But the most important thing is if we glue this in place and then put our ashlock connector through here, it prevents the ashlock connector from falling through the fuselage. So it's just a great simple solution, and we can use this on the 2 elevators and the rudder as well. Now, if these holes weren't here, I would generally make this hole a little bit smaller, obviously, so it would just fit in there. But we've got the holes already pre-done, so we'll just use those holes and they will be just fine. Now, one of the considerations is this fitting is going to be sitting right in the middle point here. So we got lots of space in the actual surface to have that fitting not interfere with installing that surface. So we're going to get these glued in, all 3 locations. Okay, moving on to the rudder here. So we made up a linkage. This needs to be 150 millimeters long. I've just done my measurements, did exactly the same setup as my elevators. We've put the servo on. Now you need to put the servo arm on before you put the servo in. This is also covered in the manual because the servo gets, I guess, face mounted into that space. So we're going to put our screws through this side, but you have no access to the servo arm when it's installed. All right, so our rudder is all set up, very straightforward and simple. We have taken the servo connector off here, shortened it to about half the length, and popped on our normal Ashlock connectors. Now, an obvious consideration with the MKS servos is the servo connector is marked, not the wire. So before you cut the wire, make sure you mark which is your signal. That's very important. So we're going to do this exact same scenario to the elevators, but I think on the elevators we're going to put a little bit of snakeskin. And the reason for that is in this situation we've got nothing going on in this area, right? There's zero movement, no servo arms, nothing like that. But on our elevator, we've got the servo arm moving here. Not that it really makes a huge difference, but we'll just put a piece of snakeskin on there so it can float around in here and have no risk of getting damaged. All right, so we're running our wires in the back end here. I was gonna put a split in the fuselage, but I'm not. I'm just gonna run continual wire all the way to the front. The kit comes with these awesome keepers. These are foam and carbon. They weigh basically nothing, but these are where you're gonna run your wires through in the back part of the fuselage. So we've got our rudder and elevator wires. We're gonna have both of those come to this lower hole here, and then the other left elevator we're gonna have come to that side. So we're just gonna glue those keepers in place with CA, and after that, we're pretty much ready to install the pipe. All right, so we've got all of our servo lines run from the back end. So 2 on that side, 1 on this side. They both come to the holes at the bottom of the fuselage. I added a little piece of shrink tubing on this section, so it is gonna have no issues as it goes through the fuselage. And then on the front part of the fuselage, I've got this piece of high temperature sheathing. This is like hundreds and hundreds of degrees. So we'll have this, when we connect these pieces of fuselage together, go through this hole right here, just a little bit, but the whole intent of that is most of that piece is gonna sit forward here, which is the hot section of the aircraft. So it's basically gonna come just past the front of the turbine. So this is moving along nice and quick. We're ready to install our pipe in the back end, and then our back end is done. All right, tail section is done. Installing the pipe is just super simple. You slide it in, you put 4 screws in the bell mouth in the pre-done housing, and it is ultra simple. Okay, so with our tail section done, we're gonna set this aside now, and we're gonna start taking a look at the front fuselage. We've got a couple things to deal with first. Number 1, I think we wanna put the engine in the fuselage before we join these 2 pieces together. But I think first, we probably wanna work on the very forward gear door because we are gonna have the best access right now, I think. So let's take a look at that. So engine-wise, we can install it afterwards, but it's really easy to get that cone depth right now. So because these fuselage pieces just butt up together, the manual covers this. You have your tail cone sticking out a certain distance, and your spacing is already done for you. So really simple. So the front door I'm talking about is underneath the tray there. So let's flip this fuselage upside down and take a look. Okay, so we've got 2 gear doors here. We've got the first pair, which is going to be run off of 1 servo. Obviously we need to take a look at that. And then our other gear door is this guy right here. So installing the servo is done through the bottom hatch here. So let's do that first because it's going to be a real struggle to get in there afterwards. For the main gear doors here, we can do all that afterwards. I'm not concerned with that. So before we attach the back end to the front part of the fuselage, let's get that dealt with. Okay, so we're going to open up the nose door, nose wheel hardware bag, and this has everything for that front end section. So just taking a look at everything here, this is the servo mount for the front pair of doors. We've got our actuation rods for the front pair of doors, and then this is going to be our rod. Probably one of them is going to be for steering, one of them is going to be for the very front gear door. So that is all of our parts. We've got ball joints for everything, including the steering system. So this is awesome. All the hardware is here. This is going to be the mounts for the main doors, or the pair of doors. So these need to get attached to the doors, but we're not going to do that now. So we're just worrying about the servo installation for the very front door. Okay, so manual has a great description here. We've got a nice diagram where the output shaft goes, where it goes on the door, so that's perfect. Okay, so initially for the very front door, I am going to not use the stock hardware, which are these big ball joints. Reason for that is I don't want to drill a massive hole into the hinge. So this setup fastens right there, and if we do a 3mm hole, there's going to be almost no material left. So I'd rather go with a 256 size ball joint from Dubro, and it's going to make this a little bit better setup, I think. We could only use one of these on the hinge side and use the regular ball on the other side. Either way is going to work just fine, but so we're going to switch that out and use our normal balls for a 440 rod. Okay, so generally I find getting the door set up is a little bit easier if you kind of have an idea in mind. So in this case, the geometry is the door is up here and our servo is sitting like this. Now, you want, ideally, if you can, you want that linkage to be in this type of scenario here when the door is closed. So the door is going to be sitting like this, and it opens in this direction like that. So what I've done is I just have everything plugged in here with the Electron ER200, what is that called? GS200, sorry. And we're able to plug in the servo. It's all programmed, all set up. So right now the servo is traveling at plus 125, minus 125, so we've got some wiggle room to narrow down those bands a little bit, but the servo in the closed position is sitting about there. All right, and then what I'll do is I'll get it set up in the closed position like this, and from there we can take a look at the whole linkage setup, and we can determine how much space we need roughly in between those two ball joints. So now what I'll do is I'll pull this ball joint off, we'll pull the servo out, we'll create that linkage, and then we'll adjust that linkage. Okay, so servo is hooked up, and I've just hooked it up to the door. Now I'm just adjusting the length at this point. So what this tells me is the door is closed, the servo is moved over, the linkage is currently too short because the servo is not going another 10 degrees maybe, so that everything's in line. We want that servo arm in line with the linkage arm. So all we need to do is pull that door open, pull the linkage off, and we will make that linkage probably 2 turns longer. And now we'll reattach and double check. Much better. So with that servo manually put in that location, we're a little loose still, or a little loose now, so we've actually gone too far. So I'm going to turn that in probably half a turn, and we'll readjust it. Okay, so I went in 1 full turn. That's where we kind of want the servo arm sitting, and you can see here, no play. So we're nice and snug. That takes all the force off the servo, and that is perfect. Now the opening amount really doesn't make a difference because we can adjust that with our servo travel. So we'll just get that adjusted in the GS200 to open up to that point, which is perfect. So I'm going to put the nut on the other side there, and we will probably plug that door in and get it adjusted. All right, guys, and I feel like it's been a while since we had a tip time, so it is time for another episode of Tip Time, and this tip time has been brought to you by trusty bent screwdriver. Thanks, Trusty. All right, so this is a good one. I mean, they're all good, but this one revolves around shop extensions. So I've got multiple extensions here in the shop. They can all be added together and they can be like 20-something feet long. This one here, I think, is my longest single one, and it's about 10 feet long. Now, I do these extensions up with 2 of the normal power box connectors, and then if I need to plug anything in, like another one of these connectors, I just take the power box thingy there that makes the female connector and plug it in, and we've got full control over everything. So what it's great for is a situation like this, where we just finished the nose door and we need to plug it in to the GS200. So I'll give you some perspective here. So the GS200 and the radio and everything is sitting right there. The plane is sitting over there. So we can move all that stuff from that bench to that bench and try and jam everything in the front end of the plane, but why not just use a nice long servo extension with one of those guys in? So obviously you have to respect polarity when you're dealing with this, so we'll plug this into the servo for the nose door, plug this into the GS200. We don't have to move a single thing to get this tested, and it saves time. Okay, so what we'll do here before we plug anything in is we want to reduce the travel on that nose servo. So we'll go into our setup, servos. Servo number 1 is our door servo, and we're just going to knock this down. So we'll drop the travel down to the open position, drop it to like just a low number. We'll go even lower, 28, and we'll go closed, and we'll bring that to 28. So now when we plug this in, we know we're not going to destroy anything because it's going to be very close to the center part of that servo travel. Okay, so we've plugged it in. You can see here it's just sitting kind of in the middle of its travel, right? We've got our nice long wire plugged in, super easy, and we will just go in here now and we will adjust this. So we'll go to our closed position. And we should be really close to 125 because that's where we had the servo arm set properly. So taking a look there, we are pretty much perfect geometry. That will definitely work. We could go one more notch on that servo, but I'm happy with that. And the door is tight and the servo's not buzzing, so that's great. And now we'll just go to our open. And in that case, we're getting close to where it needs to be. So we just add more positive. Now we're tight against the body there. So we'll back that down a little bit until we don't get any buzzing. Still tight against the fuselage, but it's not like driving the servo. So now we'll just check and make sure. So we'll go close. Perfect, no buzzing. Open. A little bit of buzzing. Knock that down a little bit. Double check, and I think that's good. It's got a little bit more travel that I can go, so that's fine. And there's our final geometry right there. All right, guys, and that's going to wrap up video number 1 in the KINETIX build from ST Jets and Aero Panda. We're making some awesome progress on this aircraft. Ultimately, guys, this aircraft is laid out very cleanly. Uber simple to install everything in. Honestly, the hardest part of this video was putting that nose door servo in. Everything else was an absolute breeze. So next episode, we are going to join the fuselage together. Well, we're going to install the engine and then join the fuselage together. And that will be the first step of the next video. So stay tuned for that, guys. Thanks so much for watching the videos. If you have any questions or comments, list them down below, and we'll see you in the next video.